Hello. So in this video, I'm going to talk through source question technique for paper 3, section A of Edexcel A-level history. So as it says here, this is the question with one source but two inquiries. So unlike paper 2, which has got two sources and one inquiry, in paper 3, you've just got one source, but you're looking at one source in more detail. So here's the plan for the video. I'm going to run through the mark scheme and then just show an example question and an example source just briefly to really kind of illustrate what I'm going to be talking about. Then I'm going to go through my suggested structure for answering these questions and follow that up with a discussion of kind of an approach in the exam, the steps to take. And then some comments from the examiner's report again in 2019, but they're quite useful just generally to think about these questions. And then finally some key takeaways from Henry the Orator Hunt from the 19th century. So firstly, the mark scheme. So I'm not going to read through all of this. You can obviously pause this video and do that. But this is level 5 of the mark scheme, and it talks about kind of interrogating the evidence of the source from both inquiries, making reasoned inferences, and this range of ways that the material can be used. So this first bullet point is really about making inferences. And if you're not sure about what that means or how to do that, I have done another video just on general source technique that I'll link to in the description that you can watch, where I talk about how to make inferences and what inferences are. The second bullet point is about use of own knowledge to illuminate, to discuss the strengths and kind of limitations of the source. Also, that point talks about the kind of values and concerns of the society from which the source is drawn. So this kind of, idea of understanding and highlighting the broader kind of context of the source. And then the third bullet point talks about the use of valid criteria and reaching a judgment. And really, this is about the kind of provenance that you're going to be discussing in this answer. So nature, origin, purpose. There are other points as well that I'll come to on that, but just breaking down the kind of the background of the source. So that's the level 5 mark scheme. So really, it's about inferences, own knowledge, and discussion of provenance. So here's an example question, just to kind of highlight how these questions look. So this is from option 36.1, which is protest, agitation, parliamentary reform in Britain, 1780 to 1928. So the question is, assess the value of the source for revealing the nature of support for the 1915 Glasgow rent strike and the reasons why the strike continued throughout 1915. So the two inquiries are, the first one is the nature of support for the 1915 Glasgow rent strike, and the second inquiry is the reasons why the strike continued throughout 1915. And as it says here, I'll link to the exemplar answer that was shared by Edexcel in the comments, so you can look at the exemplar answer, a level 5 answer for this. So they are the two inquiries. Here is the source. I'm not going to read through all this source. Again, you can look at this. It's 2019. It's available to download, or you could pause this video and look at it there. I'm just going to read through the provenance section. The provenance section is at the top of the source and is really, really, really important. So don't skip that. That, I would argue, is as important as the source itself. So the source is from Andrew McBride, The Rent Fight, Past and Present, a pamphlet published in 1921 by the Glasgow Labour Party Housing Association. McBride was a Glasgow councillor for the Independent Labour Party and was involved in the founding of the Labour Party Housing Committee in Glasgow in 1913. So hopefully, just me reading through that, you're starting to think of, well, how might that provenance, the nature, origin, purpose of this source, kind of illuminate the source or limit the source or affect the value of the source. That's a better way of putting it. Affect the value of the source for those two inquiries. Think about who's writing it, why they're writing, what type of source this is. Again, if you're not sure about provenance, if you're not confident on that, I do have this video that I'll link to where I discuss that. So This is my suggested structure. So sorry that it's quite a busy slide, but I wanted to get it all on one slide. So as it says here, you don't need an intro. You can do an intro if you want. Obviously, there are other ways of doing this. This is just my suggestion. This is the way that I always teach this. So no intro. First two paragraphs are focused on each inquiry. So paragraph 1 is focused on the first inquiry, paragraph 2 is focused on the second inquiry. So if we go back to the question, paragraph 1 will be focused on how useful this source is for revealing the nature of support for the 1915 Glasgow rent strike. And paragraph 2 is going to be the reasons why the strike continued throughout 1915. So each of these first two paragraphs follow the same structure. So point, so just say what this paragraph is about, what the source says about the first inquiry, and then pick a quote to illuminate that, and then make an inference from that quote. So from this quote, we can infer this. From this quote, we can see this, or the quote is suggesting this. So what can we infer? And then use own knowledge to support or potentially challenge that inference. So if you've got own knowledge to support the inference, your judgment then is this shows the source to be valuable in this area, or this is challenged by this evidence and therefore the source is limited in this area. So I suggest aiming to do that 3 times. So quote, inference, evidence, judgment. Okay, try and do that 3 times. Now, that's just a kind of general rule. It doesn't say, we've looked at the mark scheme, it doesn't say you have to do it 3 times. 3 times to me really gets you to the top level, because it talks about, if you look at that first bullet point, a range of ways the material can be used. So if you're doing 3 quotes and 3 inferences, 3 pieces of own knowledge and 3 judgments per inquiry, that is really showing a range of way the material can be used. Similarly, this second bullet point deploys knowledge of historical context to illuminate and or discuss limitations. You're using a range of own knowledge there. However, if you can only find 2 relevant quotes and 2 relevant inferences for one inquiry, it's not the end of the world. So you could potentially have 3 for the first inquiry and 2 for the second, or 2 for the first and 3 for the second. However, you find that it'll be okay if you can only find 2. So then at the end of each paragraph, do a summary. So overall, how useful for this inquiry. Okay, so follow the same structure for those 2 paragraphs. Then we get to the third paragraph, which is just about the provenance. Okay, so what is the impact of the provenance on the value of the source for both inquiries? The key term is the value of the source, because if you look at the question, it's about assessing the value of the source. So what impact does the nature of the source have? What impact does the origin, purpose have on the source? And 2 others to think about are the audience. Who is the intended audience? What impact does that have on the value of the source? What about the tone of the source? Maybe for this one, it's not the particular one I've looked at here, it's not, the tone isn't perhaps as useful, but there could be other sources that you get which are maybe sarcastic or sympathetic or frustrated in tone, and that has an impact on the value of the source for the particular inquiry. So try and work through these. You don't necessarily have to discuss each inquiry separately. These things could be relevant for both inquiries. But these are things you should be talking about. The provenance for both inquiries. What's the value of the source for these 2 inquiries? And what impact does the provenance have on the value of the source? And then in conclusion, kind of summarizing the value of the source for the 2 inquiries, and coming down on which inquiry is the source most useful for. I think that's a useful thing to do in this one, where you do actually say, overall, it's most useful for the first inquiry or most useful for the second inquiry because. So hopefully that's clear. Let me know in the comments if any of that isn't clear, and I'll try and kind of summarize it more clearly as a comment. But that's my structure. As I say, there are different ways of doing it. This is the way that I tend to approach these questions. So in terms of an approach in the exam, Highlighting both inquiries in different colors. So when you see the question, you've got two different color highlighter pens. So highlight the two inquiries in different colors. And then before you even look at the source, just note down what you know about the two inquiries. Just brief bullet points. What do I know? Just some own knowledge that can help you when you get to that point. Then read through the provenance information about the source, just as we did here, and kind of annotate that. So what's the nature of the source? What's the origin of the source? Who made it? When was it made? Why was it made? That's the purpose. Maybe the kind of audience and tone, well, those two, I think, particularly the tone, you need to read through it first. But the provenance information of the source, as I said, is very important to run through. Then, obviously, read through the source and highlighting key quotes to make inferences from. As I said, aim for 3 quotes per inquiry. So with the different color highlighters, highlighting relevant quotes that you can make inferences from. Then think of some own knowledge to support or challenge the inferences. So that's the approach in the exam. If you follow those steps and you follow the structure, you should be in a good place. So just really quickly, I'm going to read through some comments from the examiner's report in 2019, which I think hopefully just adds on to what I've been saying and will just, give you some more idea of what the examiners are looking for. So it says, in section A, the strongest answers demonstrated an ability to draw out and develop reasoned inferences from the source for both inquiries and evaluate the source thoroughly in relation to the demands of the two inquiries on the basis of both contextual knowledge and the nature, origin, and purpose of the source. And then it talks about guidance from previous years where what candidates shouldn't do, it's just in the middle here, is say a limitation is that the source ignores something. So the rule on this is that you can only criticize a source for leaving something out if that is directly relevant to the inquiry and or it's been left out on purpose. So for example, if it's by a politician and the politician has purposely left out something that's really important and had happened, but they are leaving it out because they don't want to look bad, then that would be a relevant thing to say in terms of saying there's a limitation here. But it's not relevant if it's something that they wouldn't be talking about. Not all sources can include everything, of course. And also there's a point here about kind of using contextual knowledge to drive an answer to the inquiry rather than using it to illuminate and discuss the source. So this is why I think this structure does really ensure that that the answer is being driven by the source and by the inferences rather than a kind of an essay that you just use the source to kind of illuminate. Just further information from the examiner's report. So making sure you deal with both inquiries, making reasoned and developed inferences that go beyond comprehension. So just actually explaining what you make of the source in terms of these inferences rather than just like rewording what the source has said. The third bullet point here is really important. So moving beyond stereotypical approaches to nature, origin, purpose, making your discussion of provenance specific rather than generic. So, for example, if you say, oh, it's a politician's speech, therefore its purpose is to persuade, that's generic. Think about the specific politician and the purpose of that specific speech. It might be to persuade, but what is it to persuade? So think about making your provenance points really, really specific. You can use those generic ideas, it's a diary and therefore it's private and therefore that brings value. But why does that bring value to this particular inquiry? Okay, so a golden rule is link back to the inquiry. That's what makes it specific. And the final bullet point there, contextual knowledge should be used to illuminate and discuss what's in the source rather than to provide an answer to the inquiry. So again, I think this supports this idea of approaching it in this way. Finally, just some key takeaways. So inferences are reading between the lines. Own knowledge is used to support or challenge the source. And provenance, think about nature, origin, purpose, audience, tone, date. And as I've said in previous videos, don't be afraid to use obvious terms like inference, provenance, value to kind of signpost your answer to the examiner. And the final kind of golden rule is just make sure you link back to the inquiries. That's what makes your evaluation, your judgments specific. Okay, I hope that was useful. Please let me know in the comments if there's anything you need me to clarify or anything else you want me to go into. Thanks for listening.